Welcome everyone to our event today. My name is Anna Shur-Wilson. I'm the program manager for career navigation here at Women Who Code, and I help our community on everything about their career and their job search, from learning new skills through scholarships to advancing and talking about promotions. So I'm thrilled today to welcome everyone to Passing Your Tech Industry, Tips to Excel from Depop Engineering Leaders. And I'm so excited to welcome our panelists. I'm going to pass it over to them to give a quick introduction, and then we'll get started with our conversation. So I will pass it to Philippa first.
Hello, my name is Philippa. I come originally from a sort of platform/infrastructure engineering shaped background. I've been managing software engineers for probably something like 5-6 years at this point in various ways. I've interviewed a lot and I've been interviewed a lot, and I would like to think that I have learned a lot along the way. I'm looking forward to talking about some of that.
Wonderful, thank you. Now I'll pass it to Sara.
Hi everyone, I'm Sara. I'm working as engineering manager in Depop. My background is not tech. I study anthropology. I'm an anthropologist. And since I started working in Depop, I did like different role. I started in the customer service team, then I moved to user research for a little while, then QA, and now I'm engineering manager of the QA team. So it was good to transition into Depop and have different opportunities. Thank you.
And then Michelle.
Hello, I'm Michelle. It's nice to meet all of you. So yeah, I'm originally from the US, from Illinois. I've been in London for the past 5 years. And I started out, my educational background was in psychology, actually, and then I kind of fell into working in software. But I started out in like client-facing roles like business analyst and project manager. But while I was doing that, I really grew curious about like how things actually worked under the hood, wanted to learn more. And I felt like the best way to really do that was to immerse myself in it. So I made the switch over to engineering 3.5 years ago and joined Depop in January. And yeah, it's been a great transition so far. So excited to be here and talk to you about it.
Thank you all so much. And thank you I felt like your backgrounds were also exciting and interesting. I really wanted to hear just from you directly about your backgrounds, and so we can have some context for this conversation. So today's conversation is about interviewing, but it's also about more than that. It's about everything that goes in. It's about career planning. But let's start off with some questions about interviewing. So Sara, you mentioned that you have worked at Depop in different capacities and different roles. So when you were transitioning these roles, what skills did you study to make this transition? Or what kind of, just speak a little bit more about your transition, please.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. So it was a mixture of studying to make a transition and a mixture of studying while the transition was already in place. And then I'm going to explain myself. So I was in Italy. I'm from Italy. I was in Italy when Depop was found. And I was working in an incubator as a social media manager. And I started to work for them just here and there. They need some copywriting for the release note. I also had the experience of working as copywriter, so I started to support them. Then once they moved to London, I've been in Italy for a while. Then I moved to London there's another personal story there because my husband was working in Depop. He is part of the founding team. He's not in Depop anymore, but yeah. So I moved to follow this dream. And once in London, I continued to freelance for some Italian clients. And then I started to work more for Depop. I set the tone of voice. So I already got this experience of setting the tone of voice and being Italian copywriter. Then I needed to increase my job. So the only opportunity that was there was in the customer service team. And this helped me to learn English, learn how to behave in a UK company, learn a completely different environment. I mean, something was different for me. And at some point in 2015, we were maybe 20, 30 people at the time. And the head of engineering, he had the idea of having a QA team into Depop instead of relying on a sourcer team just before the release. And this is how I started to be a QA. And then someone else more experienced joined, and then he was the QA lead, and we set the team. So for my QA role, I started to learn while I was doing that. At the beginning, the requirements were like different from what we have now, because we were testers and now we are QA engineers. So we code, we do UI test, we work through the quality assistant model. So at that time it was like slightly different. So I studied through my process to grow as QA. And then to apply to the engineering manager role, then is where I like study more about leadership, how to set goals and direction, how to have visions. And this is where then I did a proper interview to transition from an IC role to a manager role.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you for telling us a little bit about your preparation. Next, I want to pass it to Michelle because you mentioned your transition. So if you could reflect on the most recent interview you had, which was at Depop, or other ones, what stood out to you that really helped in your preparation for interviewing?
Yeah, so I think that there's a few things that I've done, I think in this round of interviewing and the one previous, but I think I was doing it a little bit better this time around because I knew what I was doing a little bit better. But one of the things that I did, and I feel like really helped me, was just trying to make an effort to spend at least a little bit of time coding every day. Because I knew that the likelihood of having to do some tech tests was going to be there. And yeah, I feel like this really helped me kind of just be able to overcome those nerves in the moment, because yeah, I've definitely had experiences of like being there in the tech test and, you know, like feeling a little bit flustered or feeling nervous. And I feel like having like the code kind of like at the top of your mind has been really helpful for me. So even if it's just like 5 or 10 minutes, like just spending a little bit of time doing it every day. And then another thing that I've done is that I try to, you know, because every time you interview, like the people interviewing you are going to ask kind of similar questions, stuff like, you know, tell me about your background, tell me about some recent projects that you've done. So I try to take some time to sort of really think about stuff I've done and even like write it down, like sit down, write it out, like what's a project that I've worked on? What was the architecture like? Who were the stakeholders? What were the outcomes? Like kind of just the whole thing. And then just practice reading it, saying it, like just really become familiar with it. So that way, when I'm asked a similar question to that, I kind of have like a ready, you know, not like a script, but like a ready top of mind response. And yeah, and then the last thing that I always do before interviews is like kind of like a prep myself ritual, like get myself in the right headspace, is just like put on some really happy music, some dance music, and just dance around if I can. You know, if I'm at home, I dance around. And I feel like that really helps me like get the right energy. And I feel like that really helps carry through to the interview.
Thank you. I love the, I'm seeing a lot of people in the comments saying, yes, code every day is a great idea. You just have to commit to it, even if it's 5 minutes. Yeah. It's important to make time for that. And then Philippa, I mean, kind of the same question for you, but you've sat on the other side of the interviewing table a lot as well as a hiring manager, you mentioned. So what advice would you give, or is there anything you'd like to add to what Michelle was saying about her preparation?
So there's, I think, 2 things I'd like to say. The first thing is, as a hiring manager, I personally despise tech interviews. And if I had my way, the industry would finally see the light and realize that they are not really necessary. As it stands, they are a thing. They will remain a thing. And what I would say is be comfortable writing code, but also don't jump through every hoop that people put in front of you. Think about what you actually need to be able to do in the job, right? You are not going to be converting integer to Roman numerals every day. You are not going to be reinventing FizzBuzz or writing a new search algorithm or something like that. If somebody asks you to demonstrate these things in a coding interview, to me, that's an indication that as a company, they don't really know what they're looking for, and they're just doing something, right? You should expect that somebody who asks you to take part in a live coding type exercise, they should have thought a little bit about what kind of coding do we actually do here, and what do people need to be able to demonstrate. And, I appreciate sometimes you don't have a choice. You gotta take what you can get, but it is a good indication of what a company is going to be like working for. The worst thing that I see is companies that ask you to complete take-home exercises. If a company expects you to spend, I don't know, 10, 20 hours of your weekend working on code that's going to get thrown away, maybe they don't really understand that people have lives, and maybe that's not a great place to work either. Especially when we're talking about sort of inclusivity in the interview process, these types of challenges immediately make it harder for people to take part who have families, children to spend time with, or caring responsibilities. And they will simply select out of the process. And companies that do this will end up looking very samey and very boring on the inside.
Thank you so much for saying that. We're getting a lot of the comment section is blowing up. Because yeah, someone just said in the comments, I once was told to code a bank account in 30 minutes. I mean, everyone's sharing. So I want everyone, the attendees, to know you're not alone, and there are people that want something a bit different. My next question is actually connected to what you were saying, Philippa, is, if it is a conversation where you do get to a point where you actually you're not strong in an area they're asking you about, or you don't know how to solve a problem. We can start with Philippa, but what's the best way to say, I don't know right now, but I can learn how to do it very quickly? Or how would you advise someone to showcase that? I'll start with Philippa.
It's actually a really, really good question. The reality is, in tech, there is always going to be a new thing that you have to learn that you don't understand. And sometimes, let's be honest, you'll get thrown into a place where there is a legacy code base that was written long before any of us were here, and now it's broken and somebody has to fix it. And nobody knows what to do. So it's normal to not know the immediate answer to something. What I'm looking for when I interview people is sort of proactive problem solving abilities. I would like to see somebody be able to tell me, here's what I'm going to do to find out. I have an inkling that I might find something here. I'm going to read about it. I'm going to, try to code something and see what happens, and I'll draw my conclusions from that. Just walk me through the process that you would take in order to overcome whatever the challenge is, and just show that you can, ideally independently, figure out the answers, because it's a large part of the job.
Yeah, I'd like to, Sara or Michelle, do you have any kind of reflection on when you were interviewing, when you came to a place that you kind of had to not explain knowledge gaps, but just talk through a problem?
Yeah, I can share. So I had actually an example of this in my last round of interviews. So I was doing doing an architectural interview, and I was being asked a lot of questions related to relational databases. And while I know what relational databases are, I don't have a lot of experience with them because just the projects I've worked on previously just haven't used them. They were either stateless or we used DynamoDB tables. And so, so my kind of approach to this was to, just be upfront and say, well, I haven't used this personally, but if I was to be doing this with a Dynamo table, so it's like kind of a similar concept, this is how I would approach it. So really just like talk through my thinking about how I would approach it. And then I said, and so based on what I do know about relational databases, this is, these are the types of information that I would try to find out. So yeah, very much like what Philippa said, like just trying to really explain the way I was thinking and really just trying to communicate about the knowledge I did have and then how I would use that to then get to the answer. And I think like, it seems to me like interviewers are kind of looking for you to be able to like just communicate what you're thinking and like share your thoughts.
Before the next question, I see Sara, I see you nodding. What about in your experience?
No, I'm just agreeing with what Michelle said, because to me it's slightly different. It never happened to me on an interview, but to me it was a process of learning tech skills while I was working. So I was like feeling the pressure of providing something that I needed to for the company. So to me, it was a matter also to share what I was thinking and what I was in my mind missing to reach that, and asking like a lot of questions around what I should do something. And to me was like learning how to use tools to test and also how to actually write in code. And whenever I was doing a mistake and the test was failing because it was not running, to me, it was I was going to my tech mentor and I was explaining, I did this because I wanted to do that. And I remember that this function was doing that. So why is not working? So it was like a matter of going through way of thinking and thought for me as well. So yeah, that's why it was, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, the next question is for you also, because you mentioned that you are starting as a new manager on the team. So even if you haven't conducted interviews yet, but as you're starting to learn how to be an interviewer on the other side, what are some of the things that you're learning? What are, as you prepare to conduct your first interviews for your new role?
So to me, what is one of the most important thing is understand that the person that is going to have the interview is a team player, someone that wants to learn, someone that is set in our direction, someone that will have a positive impact and they will follow what is our company DNA, what is Depop DNA, because I think it is very well written and it means a lot for us that we keep a specific standard of way of working, behavior, respect with other people, support of other people. So I rather go with a supportive people rather than to a supportive person rather than to a senior person, because to me, the behavior, the character, the approach, it is what makes the team in a healthy situation. So my biggest challenge now is learning how to spot these and how to make sure that the person is following these, or how to understand that they are maybe, I don't know, selfish or working for themselves. They're not interested in the teamwork, but they are there, I don't know, just for personal purpose. So this seems a challenge to me.
Yeah, I think that's great advice because most companies have publicly published on their website like a culture document or their mission and values, and you can go and research that as you are preparing. I want to bring it back quickly to something that Michelle mentioned, because I think you mentioned that someone was asking you about projects or something like that. And so something that happens a lot in our community is that people ask us, like, should I be doing side projects to kind of like beef up my resume or give myself something to talk about? So Michelle, did you do any of these kind of like personal projects or personal interests, or alternatively, as you were doing your career transition, did you complete any like certifications or anything that you could talk about extra in your interview?
Yeah, sure. So once I kind of decided that I was going to make the change over to engineering, I considered whether to do a boot camp, and ultimately decided, okay, well, I'm going to see if I'll try and see if I can get a job without doing a boot camp. And if I can't get a job, then I'll do it. So that was my approach. And so I was mostly like a self-taught engineer, and I did a couple online courses. Like I did an online Python course. I ended up doing a deep learning certification, which wasn't really like an engineering course specifically, but I do think that maybe kind of helped when I was looking for jobs, because it sort of showed, like my commitment to completing this like course, all of these different courses in like a tech related field, even though I wasn't looking for like an AI job. And then another thing I did, which I think was really helpful, was I did do a little personal project. So when I was starting out and first learning Scala, which is the language that I use now, I was going to some meetup groups, and I was getting some opportunity to get mentoring with some like established engineers. And I started a little Twitter bot project during the course of those sessions. And I kind of like took that and built it out a little bit. And so it was just a very simple little application that used a little graphics library, created a new, created a little image every day, like a little geometric image, and then posted onto Twitter. And I had it running in AWS Elastic Beanstalk, and I had tests. And so it was kind of like a very simple, but like fully featured project. And I think, for me specifically, because I didn't have like a CS degree, like schooling credentials or a boot camp, like I did have something that I could say, like, look, I can like make something work. Like I have it, I, can do these things. And it was like really nice to be able to share that. And I think like one company even like asked to see the code. And so it was like nice to have something in hand specifically for that. And then, yeah, the courses were good. There was another certification that I did, not before I made the initial change, but I did do an AWS certified developer certification. And I found that to be super helpful. Just not having had like a traditional CS background, I felt like it gave me, even though it's like specifically about AWS products, but it kind of gives a good overview of like cloud computing and computing concepts in general. And I found that one to be really helpful as well.
Thank you. I'm going to take a small pivot because we're not at the Q&A section yet, but Michelle in the audience gave a great question that I would love. We can start with Philippa, but if anyone else, Michelle mentioned, very connected to what you said, Philippa, people have families, people have responsibilities. And so doing side projects, while that is advice and good advice, like just like Michelle shared, it can be difficult to prioritize what kind of things you should do. And so Philippa, from your perspective, what advice could you give about, someone with that, a lot of responsibilities and personal responsibilities? How can you prioritize what kind of projects will be helpful, or what kind of research can you do?
Actually, I saw the question, and I think it's a really important one. It's the reason why I try and make sure as much as I can not to put too much weight on people having done side projects, especially when you're hiring for somebody sort of in the mid-tier, at least, who already has a job that they spend their time on. You should be able to talk to that person about the work that they're currently doing during those 8-9 hours that they're committing to their current employer, talk about the technical challenges that they're solving there. And you shouldn't need a side project to stand out. I think they're more important when you're trying to sort of switch tracks, right? Like Michelle said, when you're coming from a more of a product management type background and you want to move into software engineering, having done something sort of to demonstrate that you're serious about that can help you stand out in the sort of pool of CVs that people need to look through. And I would very much try and maximize impact. Don't spend huge amounts of time on things that, you know, are maybe only tangentially related. Think about the kind of job you want to go for. Do something small that you can commit a little bit of time to, ideally every day. It's easier to spend 10, 20 minutes on something every day than it is, even if you have an hour once every weekend, thinking back to what did I do last weekend. There's a lot of week in between, right? Try and pick something that is relevant to the job or the industry that you are interviewing with, or that you're aiming for, and sort of use it more to show that you're interested in the business and in the line of work, not necessarily that you know how to write Python.
Thank you so much. We have a couple more prepared questions, but we also have many, many questions from the audience. So I'm going to pivot to those pretty quickly. But the last prepared question for Philippa is, what kind of questions do you like to ask as a manager? And like, what would be your completely ideal interview scenario if you were in charge of designing the whole thing?
So I mentioned already a little bit, I like to talk to people about the work they're actually doing. So what I like is when candidates come into the interview with myself, prepared to talk shop, as it were. Talk about some of the projects that they've worked on over the last 6-12 months. Anything beyond that is ancient history in tech, right? Like the technologies that you used to design a solution 3 years ago are probably no longer the tools of the trade right now if you were doing it again. So talk about something fairly recent in detail. It doesn't have to be a success. Often you learn more from the failures. Talk about the technical challenges you encountered, how you overcame them. Talk about how you learned things. How did you go from, okay, this is a word that I've heard for the first time today, to, okay, I know what this is. I can use it. I can do stuff with it. I can solve problems with it. Yeah, and as I mentioned, I personally don't like coding interviews very much. What I've done in previous roles where I was responsible was to have technical interviews that involve reading code much more than writing code, because that is a huge part of the job as a software engineer. You read a lot more code than you write. So that can be sort of a prepared mock pull request that you review together with an interviewer, or it can be a code base. One thing I've done in the past is have an open source code base, maybe something that you know a company already looks after anyways, and ask a candidate, walk me through this, have a look at it, walk me through it. What does it do? What do you notice? How is it structured? And sort of explain what you see and show what you are like when you approach a code base that you haven't worked with before. That gives me much more insight into how you think on a technical level than seeing you write out your memorized version of FizzBuzz.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that. And then I have one last question kind of for Sara and Michelle as we transition into the Q&A. So a very common question that is asked in an interview is, can you explain the most rewarding project that you've worked on so far? And I would love to hear from both of you as people that interviewed recently. How would you answer this question, or what specific points do you want to make sure when answering a question about like talking about something very rewarding to you? Anyone who's ready.
I can go. So I guess I would say that like probably the most like rewarding project I've done so far since changing careers is actually one that I did fairly recently at Depop, where I got the chance to lead my team on a small like a small MVP project. And while in my previous roles, I had done like project leadership before, this was the first time I got to do that in engineering. And I found it like really fun. It was a really good learning experience. Yeah, it was a relatively small project, but it felt like a big accomplishment for me because it was something new to me. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, anything you'd like to add, Sara?
Yeah, to me was like a very long project that we got in Depop a few years ago, which was like implementing the quality assistant model and working through a completely different way of working. So the outcome was a cultural change, and there were different outputs, like implementing the testing framework, having a testing framework, learning how to test, how to code to test, then end the contract with an outsourcer testing team to build our confidence. I mean, that was an output, but was like building our confidence of what we were shipping into the release without needing an extra outsourcer team to do regressions. So we wanted to move everything internal, and we wanted to change the way we were coding, we were delivering, and we were testing. And also changing how we were testing, how QA were seen in Depop, not just testers at the end of the agile process, but coach of qualities and how we could support anyone in the business on providing quality, which is a more like huge standard. I mean, a more huge way of working rather than being standard tester. So it was very, very long, I would say, but yeah. It was interesting to work through that.
Thank you both. I think some of the things you touched on is how to answer this question is like talk about the outputs and the actual impact of the projects. But I'm very excited to get into the Q&A section now. We have tons of questions. A few things before we get into the audience questions that I want everyone to know is that unfortunately we probably won't be able to get to everyone's questions. And any questions about like if Depop is hiring, because this amazing panel is really inspiring people, they want to work with you. My colleagues at Women Who Code are going to put some contacts information if you want to speak to someone at Depop. So we'll put that in the chat throughout. We're going to focus on more of the general questions right now. But the first question I have actually is for Sara, because people are very interested in how you moved countries. So it's a little bit of a pivot, but I've seen a bunch of questions like, well, we talked about why you moved countries, but a lot of people are doing interviews in their non-native language and doing a cultural change. So I guess to kind of address all of these questions, can you just talk very briefly about some of the challenges that you had changing culture and any tips that you would give people?
Sure. It is a journey. It is still a journey. So on my side, I can say I love to travel. I'm an anthropologist. I really want to meet people from different culture, different background. So that's something that it's like on me, it's my character. But it is a challenge, obviously, because when I first moved to London, I thought I knew English because I studied it at school. I read a few books during uni. And then coming here, I realized that I was like completely wrong. I needed to like start everything again. So it was also, and I still feel that I'm not 100%. And when I feel like emotion, I do mistakes. So probably I made more mistakes today in this call rather than in any other chat that I can have with people. But at some point I accept that, and I'm very open to that. So I always say to people, whenever you see that I'm making a mistake, please let me know, maybe drop me a message or whatever, but it's my way to learn because I need to learn day by day. So that's something. Then at the beginning, when I just moved, I did a few interviews for roles that I was not sure that I wanted, but for me was a test to test myself, how I could go through that and how an interview was. So it was like important to me to understand that. And then I was lucky because Depop supported me in my career change, and they understood. We were a startup at that time, so they understood that I moved to continue my love story with the person that is now my husband. So it worked. But I also had some support from the company as well, because they kind of hired me in something that I could do easily. And then, yeah, I mean, it is still a journey, and it's not easy, and also it is a compromise, because I kind of, being in the UK, I ended with something that was my passion, which is anthropology. So in Italy, I had some link and contact to like do some extra research or things that I couldn't do here because of a language barrier. And also another passion for me was theater, drama. I was doing like theater classes, and here it was like completely impossible to me because I mean, you know, I couldn't be on a stage here. So yeah, there are compromises, but the other side of the coin is that I'm in London, so there are like different opportunities, and I was challenged on that. I hope it answered.
Yes, you answered it perfectly. Yes, you answered it perfectly. I think there was. Oh yes, Philippa.
I can just add something, because I think this is actually a really important point. I had the same experience when I moved countries. I grew up in Germany. I moved to the UK some 15 years ago, and I thought I knew English, and I was quickly, taught otherwise when I moved to Scotland, where really the only thing I could do is rub my German accent off against the Scottish one. Language barrier is real, and if your native language is not English and you are interviewing in English, don't get hung up about it. The language barrier is there, and it's something that people are aware of. As long as you get the point across, it doesn't matter if the grammar is right or if you picked exactly the most eloquent words. Focus on what you have to say, not necessarily so much how you say it. That is something that an interviewer can overlook or can figure out. What matters is who you are and what you have to offer.
Yes, Sara.
Thank you. Sorry, just to quickly add something on this. I just realized that to me, it is not just language, but it's also like cultural behaviors, because the way that you want to communicate, it's coming from your cultural background. So how we resolve conflict in Italy, how we lead a meeting, how we say things in Italian and in an Italian environment is completely different from how things you say here in the UK. So what I'm doing is like kind of having a coach in Depop that can help me to understand where is the gap of like what I want to say and what is the good way of saying this in English. It is not a grammar thing, but it's like a way of saying things, which it's something that I'm still learning.
Great. Those were wonderful answers. And I think you saw in the chat that people are really coming from everywhere, and few people are in the process of moving countries. So that is very, very helpful. My next question is for Michelle. What kind of coding were you doing every day, and how did you stay motivated to do that?
Like when I was like, before I made the change. So yeah, I started out doing Python. That was like, I did like I don't know what you call it, like just like a self-paced online Python course. That was the first thing I did. But then I got involved with this Scala meetup group. So I didn't really know Scala, but I thought, oh, meetup group, that sounds good. Like be a good way to meet people and a good opportunity to get some mentoring. So that's kind of how I got started with Scala. And yeah, I think I would say that like initially I wasn't totally sure that I was going to definitely switch into engineering. And so like, I wouldn't say that I was like doing it every day and super motivated, because I was still like kind of trying it on and trying it out. So I would do a little bit, maybe a week would go by, I wouldn't do anything. Then I would go to another meetup, do a little bit more. But as this kind of went on over the course of maybe like 6 months, where I was like doing a little bit here and there. But then I think at some point I decided like, okay, I really want to make this happen. And then I started putting a lot of effort into that side project, which I told you guys about. And then I really did start working on it every day. And just the motivation was there because I was like, okay, I want to make this happen. And yeah, I think because I had a project that I was working on that, you know, was different than just, you know, a question that you solve and then you're done. Like I think the project itself kept me motivated because there was always like a little bit more to do on it. And there was kind of like a done state that I was trying to get to. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Yes, that's extremely helpful. The next question is for Philippa. This came up a couple of times. And Nikki wants to know, you know, people get taught in boot camps or in other courses to put their GitHub link or website on the resume. And Nikki wants to know if hiring managers actually have time to click on that or how often you do. I think every person probably is going to be different, but this is a question for you.
It's a very good question, actually. And it's one that I tend to grapple with a little bit sometimes. The reality is looking at someone's GitHub, if they do have any public code that they've been working on, can be a really quick way to, you know, confirm claims that somebody makes in a CV even before you speak with them. The challenge that I have as a hiring manager is to make sure that people who don't have that and don't have an opportunity to do that don't get disadvantaged. So I will never base any decisions based on what I see on somebody's GitHub. What it might do is it give me something to talk about during the interview. But if you come with something that you want to talk about that you've worked in your day job that isn't public, that should be just as good. Certainly if you have stuff that you're proud of, if you are, you know, lucky enough that you are working on an open source project or something, you know, anything like that, sharing it before an interview can provide you with something to talk about during the interview.
Thank you. So my next question is, there are so many questions. I have to organize them very quickly. I think the next question that I'm seeing a lot is, can anyone share examples of big interview fails, let's call them learning experiences, not failure, that you've witnessed or you experienced, and how can you turn that into a positive? So, you know, you're faced with something that just like really doesn't go well, but what did you learn from that?
I've got one. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So yeah, when I was very first getting my first engineering job, because I had spent some time doing some Python, I had spent some time doing some Scala, and the way that I kind of got my foot in the door with interviews, because I think like, you know, unless you have, well, I don't know if this is the way it is for everybody, but I didn't start getting like messages from recruiters until I actually had like an engineering job on my LinkedIn. But the first round, I wasn't getting anything from recruiters because I think they're mainly looking for people who have engineering experience. So the way I kind of got my foot in the door was just through networking, through the meetup group that I was going to. So like I met a lot of people that way, and I got several opportunities for interviews that way. And I had there was one company that was doing Scala, and there was another company that was doing Python. And I was kind of interviewing with these companies like very close in time span. And when I went to the Scala interview, I think they had me do a take-home exercise. And during the in-person interview, they wanted to do like some pair programming where you know, we looked at the code I wrote and made some changes. And I think I had been focusing a bit more on Python at that point. And I just didn't have that much experience with programming in general. So it was all like very new to me. But basically they asked me to make changes to my code, and I just could not remember how to code in Scala. Like I just couldn't remember how to do it. And it was a total fail. it was bad. But I did my best to try to, like, in all other areas of the interview, like, convey that I knew what I was talking about, try to, like, bring in, like, experience from my previous career, and, like, talk, try to just, like, do my best to, like, keep a positive attitude, talk about everything that I'd been doing and how I was really dedicated to doing this. And even though it was like a fail on the pair programming exercise, they actually came back to me later and ended up giving me another opportunity to come in and work with them again. And this was like 3 weeks later. And by that point, I was a little bit better prepared, and I actually, they offered me the position. So I think, I guess, well, the lesson I learned from that was what I do now, which is, like, always be coding every day, so you're fresh and you don't get put on the spot with this stuff. But the other lesson is that it's not only about the programming, it's not only about the coding, like, it's very much about, the attitude that you bring, the other knowledge. Like, if you're switching careers, like, try to think of ways that you can talk about your previous experiences and how those might be helpful. I had done, leading projects, I had done a lot of working with clients, and even though that wasn't, like, specific to programming, I think that I was able to, like, convey my abilities in that way, and I was able to do enough to make up for that kind of failure in that moment, that it was enough that they wanted to bring me back in, and it worked out.
Thank you. So the next question, we have a bunch of questions coming in, like some more early career, mid-level, and senior. So I'm going to break them up into that, and then as we end near the end. But a bunch, one beginner question that I saw was from Jolie, which was, during the tech test part of the interview, is it permissible to look at your notes, or are you trying to speak more without that kind of preparation, would you say? We can start with Philippa, maybe.
Can I take that one?
Yeah.
As far as I am concerned, during a technical exercise, you should be looking at everything and anything that you can get your fingers on, because we're not hiring, we're not looking for people who can memorize code. We're looking for people who can solve problems. And how do you solve problems? You use tools, right? We all copy from Stack Overflow. It's part of the job, right? We all Google things. We all sometimes forget how the syntax of the dastard switch statement went, right? And you look it up, or you copy paste it from some code base that you already have, that you know works. So do what you would normally do, including maybe throwing the laptop at the wall, getting a coffee, and coming back in 5 minutes and trying again. That's all part of how we work and how we solve problems. And if somebody expects you to know, library interfaces by heart, they're not selecting for the right skills.
So another question that this is kind of going more towards the mid-level is how to, sorry, let me start again. People are wondering, especially with all the layoffs, if we feel like the mid-level, how interview landscape has changed at all. So like, what kind of things that people can maybe expect differently if the last time they interviewed was entry level, and then now they're kind of interviewing for a higher position. And this might be Philippa, but anyone is welcome to answer.
I'm happy to say a few words. I think the thing that differentiates hiring a junior from a mid-level for me is, in a mid-level, I look for more independence. I look for more foundational understanding of the problem space, of the landscape. Somebody who is junior, I expect will need coaching. I expect they will need somebody to sit with them and talk them through, here's what we're trying to achieve. And then they should be able to go away and write some code to a ticket. But I don't expect them to solve the big problems of tomorrow all by themselves. When you get to that mid-tier, you should be able to propose to your team, here's how I think we should approach this problem, how we should solve it. It doesn't have to be correct, right? There can still be a conversation, and a more senior person or a staff engineer type person might come in and say, have you considered this? No, okay, let's go back to the drawing board, think about that. But you should be able to, take the initiative and make a start on solving the problem if you want to be in that mid-tier.
Thank you. I want to also just acknowledge everyone who is in the comments in the Q&A kind of mentioning that they have had to go through layoffs recently, and it's been really tough. And I just want to say that this is a tough moment. And so and then I'd love to hear other people's opinion, but I'll just share that we hear a lot in our community. Perhaps in the past at a senior level, it was a little bit easier to find your next job, but there are a lot of candidates right now. So it's not necessarily something that you are doing, but we welcome you to join the community and keep meeting people like that. But I had a question actually for Sara. One moment. You may have answered this in the chat, but people are very interested in comparing freelancing and corporate environment. If you could talk a little bit about that transition, that would be wonderful.
Cool. Yeah, sorry, I talked because I saw that
that's okay.
Not much time left, so I wanted to give an answer. I mean, it is a tough one because to me, being a freelancer meant to be free, which is something that is really, really important to me. And because of the discrepancy between my background and my job, I really want to do both. And this is like a characteristic of mine. I really want to do a lot of things. So being freelance, it helped me to learn different jobs and also to keep a balance between some passions that are not paying bills and my actual work. And at that time, I was also working as tour leader. So I was working with a tour operator. I was leading people all around the world. And it was really in line with my uni background. But also what I felt, at some point, I felt too uncomfortable on continue to be a freelancer because the expectation that your clients have, they are very high, they demand a lot. And whenever you need to fill, it's on you. And if you don't fill that gap, you won't be called the next time again. And I was working in the UK, I was not in my country anymore. So when I was freelancing in Italy, it was easier than here. But getting clients in the UK was like almost impossible because I couldn't use the skills that I learned in Italy. I was Italian copywriter, I was social media manager, I was doing research, and also leading people all around the world. And all of those needed a lot of experience of talking English. So I couldn't do that. And also because the tech environment, the tech industry was something that happened later in my life. I didn't have that also skill to auto-organize myself and study a lot of different things because I didn't know how to start. So it was at some point I felt like uncomfortable and I didn't want to continue in that way. And it was a compromise because obviously I'm not leading people around the world anymore. But it's also true that now the company is interested in my growth. And I have now a different motivation, which is like learning and growing in this career that I like. And to me also a change that was important is to moving from being hands-on to being hands-off, which is something that I wanted because now I feel that I'm more in line with engineering manager role rather than AC because I learned Swift, I learned how to code, but it was not my cup of tea, so I couldn't continue to do that forever. So it's a compromise, but I'm happy to do that because I see that there's a lot of support now. I'm learning from different sources in Depop, and yeah, I see a path for me. Before I couldn't see that path.
Thank you. So this is the, we're going to finish up, but I had some attendees, they want to get a warning when it's the last question because there's such exciting resources that are in the chat. So I'm telling the audience, make sure to keep anything that you want from the chat, because we're on our last question. So the last question, and as we're at time, is I always like to ask people, like, what's your favorite learning resource? Yeah, what's your favorite learning resource that's helping you the most right now? So let's start with Michelle, and then we'll do Philippa and end with Sara.
Oh, that's a good one. I guess, well, because I'm a Scala engineer, I don't know how many other Scala engineers would be on the chat, but I'm reading a book right now by Gabriel Volpe, which is Practical Functional Programming in Scala, and it's really great. So if you are interested in functional programming, it's a really great resource. And then I always go back to AWS stuff, just because they're always putting new stuff out. I like learning about it. They have a lot of just a lot of learning resources. And yeah, I think that's really good for learning like non-code, but infrastructure type stuff.
Philippa.
This is going to be somewhat out of left field, but I come from a sort of SRE shaped background. I'm interested in systems and how they work and why they don't work and what do we do to make them work. So one of my favorite resources for learning are reports on industrial and air accident investigations, because you can learn so much from the systemic failings that lead to industrial accidents. And you can learn so much from what people came away with, the findings that these reports contain. And a lot of it is applicable to sort of the large scale systems that a lot of software companies operate on, that need to function within certain parameters, with will have consequences when they don't. And so that is what I tend to spend my spare time on studying.
Thank you so much. And then Sara to finish us, and then just a reminder to everyone, we're going to end after this. So open the links from the chat now. Okay, thank you.
So to me, it's completely different source. So to me, it's like people that I admire, and I used to ask a lot of questions to them to understand what was the path, what I have done, how they behave if they have a specific problem. So obviously people that are in a similar role, and also people are outside my company, because my experience is like very long in Depop, but at the same time, I don't have another, a comparison. So I try to speak with people in the business, in the industry, but outside the company, and people that have emotional intelligence, because to me, my work is to work with people, support people, understand where they want to go and support them in their career path and their growth. And any other books that they tell stories about how someone moved and how a company grow and how they still keep the connection like between people.
Well, I just want to thank you all so much. Every single person in the chat is asking, like, can we work with you? I wish that I was on a team with these amazing people. So my colleague is putting the LinkedIn's just one more time in the chat as we close it out. But I just want to thank all of our panelists so much, and a huge thank you to Depop. This has been absolutely incredible, and you've left everyone with really amazing advice. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a lot of fun.